Good evening, everyone. I'm Weasel D from Grim Press, and in today's video I'm going to cover one of our more unique products, Verses Magicae by DM Conclave. The title's actually a good modernization of Voces Magicae, which are ancient Roman magical words written in ancient Greek or Latin. And of course, that gives you an idea what the supplement is all about. Containing over 450 magical rhymes for every single official spell for 5e D&D requiring a verbal component. Each are provided with their very own magical incantation, including variations according to every different spell effect there is. You no longer have to just say, I utter some mystical words while describing your character's spellcasting. In addition to the material from the original product, the conversion also includes a customized extension by me and Unique, which helps bring these magical words to life within Fantasy Grounds. And I'll be covering that extension in this review today as well. For the most part, this is one of those things where, the physical copy of a PDF makes it easy for a character. They go through and they find a few of these phrases that they might want to use, and then they could write them down and jot them on their character sheet, and the character can go ahead and play that. But depending on how you're doing that within a digital campaign, you may not have the ability to keep those available to you. So you could always use this as a reference if your players are those who like to speak for their character and they want to keep some of these phrases available to them when they want to role play their character, or you have the actual text here that you can click on to make it just come up into the chat window as you're interacting with it, or just make notes within your character sheets. In the design of these spells, of these verses, they'll tell you whether it needs verbal, semantic, or material components. And again, it's only going to cover those that have a verbal component to them. So in order to do this, I like the way that the design went into all of the phrases and verses the way they're using. It's not just random rhymes and random words. There's some thought process that went into the structure of the incantations themselves. If you're going to using a cantrip, they're actually very simple 2 to 4 word kind of phrases representing the simplicity of the cantrip. If you have a spell that has a more simple casting time, right, an action or a bonus action or a reaction, these kind of spells are typically 2 lines, giving you a rhyme, which gives you some sort of effect, that tells you a little bit about what the spells are actually going to do. If the spells have a longer casting time, over a minute or more, or some longer rituals, there's actually 4 lines, 2 to 4 lines in there to kind of give you the idea that the spell is taking longer to cast. Within the rhymes themselves, there are also references to the various schools of magic, so that the words that are being chosen are very distinct and purposeful, and not just making up a grade school rhyme for why these things are happening the way they are. And I really like that. It means a lot of thought went into the individual phrases here that you're going to be able to use. One of the things they also include, they do include some magic items, because there are things that non-speaking characters. How do you have a non-speaking character interact with a spell which has a verbal component? A couple ways they can handle this is they actually have some magical items that can assist with that in order to handle some of these verbal components. One of which actually gives the character a voice. So you want to check those magic items out as well. So that's the basics of what the supplement is all about. Now, what really makes this unique for us and really brings us to life, like I said before, is the extension. Because trying to do this manually by yourself, it's just something that can be cumbersome. But it's still, there's a lot of fun and flavor to it. But if we want to really take advantage of Fantasy Grounds, we want to make those kinds of things automated. So I'm going to go through a couple examples here and show you how this works. The first off is when you purchase the supplement, in addition to the module, you will get an extension. So you'll want to put the extension into your extensions folder, and you'll want to put the module into your modules folder, and make sure that you load the extension up before you start up your campaign. In the options, there are a couple things that you can turn on. So what's going to happen is that the magical phrase is going to show up on top of the token as they speak it, as well as showing up inside the chat window. So some of the options that you'll have to include here are how long do you want to show the verse on top of the token. Now defaults to 5 seconds, but you can rotate it through to make it less time. You can make it stay on the token until the end of the turn. You can make it not show at all. So you can adjust this accordingly on how much visibility you want to give to these words. The second thing here is regarding NPCs. In addition to the players being able to speak these phrases, if you have NPCs that you want to be able to do the same thing, you could turn this on or off. And what will happen is it will match the spells that are available on an NPC's monster sheet. Any spells they have, they will get their verses loaded. When they cast their spells, they will show up on here as well. And we'll go over that and I'll show that to you in a little bit. This option here is whether to load the verse on power add. So this would be very helpful if characters don't already have spells on their character sheet. What this is saying is, hey, when you add a spell to the character sheet, go ahead and load the verse automatically for it. You could have that turned on or off, which gives you more control over when you want verses to appear. You might choose, for example, only to have them show up on certain spells rather than all spells, or maybe only high-level spells versus low spells, things like that. So this is up to you how much you want to automate that process. And the last option here is whether or not when the character or the NPC is speaking or doing their spell, do you want the verse to show up in chat in addition to showing up on the token? This way, it's here a little bit more persistent. If somebody's not actively looking at the token at the time that it's being spoken, and the duration expires, you still want them to be able to take advantage and see what's happening on here. Alright, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you a couple different examples of how to get verses loaded up onto your character sheet, and then we're going to go ahead and show these in use for you. So let's bring up the character sheet for Nanami here that we're going to work with. And we're going to go up and bring up some of her spells. So we're going to go through this a couple different ways. Let's start off with Fireball, right? So here we have our Fireball spell that already exists on the character sheet. This is just the default Fireball that comes with the player's handbook. And if you right-click on this, you'll see there's a new icon here called Verses. From here, you can either go in and edit the existing verses that are there, or you can load the default verse if it isn't already present. So in this case, you'll notice if I go to edit options, there is nothing here because this spell was already on my character sheet. So even though I had the option that says add verse when power is added, it's not here because this spell was already on the character sheet. So in that case, I'd have to right click on it, go to verses, and go to load defaults. Now when we go back into edit, you'll see that the phrase is now available here for Nanami when she casts that spell. So we'll move that out of the way for a second, and I'll show you here on the character sheet we have Nanami, right? She's going to go ahead and cast her spell. And when she does that, you'll see the text show up on her name. It'll stay there over her token. It'll stay there through the duration I've set, and then you'll also see it appear down here inside the chat window. So that's one way you can get the verses loaded up onto your sheet. The second is if we wanted to go ahead and do that automatically. Let's say it's a brand new spell. Now we can go ahead and use Fireball again just to give you an example to show you the differences of when you put that onto your character sheet. So we'll go ahead and grab the same exact spell, this one for the Fireball on the D&D Player's Handbook, and we'll drop that in there. Okay. Now you'll see it'll expand, so we know this is the one we're working with. In this case, when I go into the verses and I go into edit options, you'll see that the item is already there. So this is part of that automation. I also wanted to show you that what I should have shown you on the last one, I'll show you on this one again, let's bring this back up, is that inside the verses option here, there is a trigger on when this particular phrase is spoken. The default trigger is when the spell is cast, and cast is using the cast icon here, or using the attack or save. Anything in this line will generate this phrase. You also have the ability to make the verse effect when you have damage as your trigger, whether you have a healing item as your trigger, or whether you have an effect as your trigger. And you can combine those. The same spell may have both a casting component, right, and a damage component, and you can go ahead and have different phrases for each of those various things. You aren't restricted just to the phrases that come with Magicka, with the supplement itself. You could add your own phrases, and you could further customize these things as you go. So, for example, if you have a spell here, like this is the one from 5e automatic effects, you'll see in this spell, in addition to the regular damage, there's a secondary effect that you could use as part of the original spell to ignite an object and put light with a candle. So if you really want to get creative, you could have one verse for the cast line, one verse for the damage line, and you could have one verse for the effect line. Right? So I've got a couple of these already loaded up here for Firebolt. Right? We've got load default here. I'll go ahead and put that on there. I'll also show this to you from the perspective of an NPC. Right? So in this case, I have the Archmage loaded up, and since I had that option which says load effects when added to the combat tracker, when I'm interacting with the Archmage, in this case the Archmage is fighting against this this young dragon as well here, and I've got the spells loaded up onto the character sheet, onto the combat tracker here. It's going to match these as well. So when I go ahead and make my attack with my Firebolt here, okay, the NPC is going to say those words, and they're going to show up in here in the combat tracker as well. That's him casting a Firebolt, right? This is him casting a Shocking Grasp on him, and then you could go through and any one of those 450 spells, it's going to show up onto the NPC. They're going to speak if you have that enabled for you. Let's go back to Nanami for a second. I want to go back to that option that I was talking about with changing the different types. So let's take a look at Magic Missile for a second. Right, let's go ahead and load that default up and come back into the edit options. So you'll see here that the default option is going to be on cast. Right? Now, Magic Missile doesn't have a cast line. Right? It only has a damage line because it hits automatically. So even though this is loaded up as part of the default here, right? If I just went ahead and hit the damage button, okay, the damage will happen, but no verse is going to show up. What you need to do is, in the case where you only have one of these types, you need to change the trigger from the one that is for cast over to the one that it is for damage. Now, when we go ahead and apply that same damage, she'll say the phrase to go along with it. Now, I know this is something that the developer may take care of in the future to kind of toggle these for you automatically. It's on a wish list, but we'll see if he ever gets a chance to get to that or not. But for now, right now, you can go ahead and change these effects yourself as you these triggers on the different spells as you want to. All right. I've got a list of things here that I'm kind of reminding myself that I want to go through. We just talked about the Magic Missile one. Let's talk about the Ceremony one next. So Ceremony is a really interesting spell because it has multiple effects that can go off with a character. So let's go ahead and talk about multiple effects. Let's drop this onto our character sheet here first. Right? Now, this is the Ceremony, which is the default one out of the D&D Xanathar's Guide. Unfortunately, on the default Ceremony, there is no cast, there is no damage, there is no effect or anything, right? So you have a situation here was, okay, I can have a verse assigned to it, but there's nothing that can actually trigger it. So what you need to do is you need to create one of those things, a cast, a damage, an effect, or whatever. What I should have done was I should have had the 5e automatic effects loaded here, right? So if I have Xanathar's Guide to everything, and I load up the automatic effects for it, and I add that spell instead of the default one, then I'll have all of those effects already coded for me. So if I grab this 5e automatic effects version of Ceremony and I drop that instead, you'll now see I've got all these different effects that I can trigger it for. So if I go into the verses now, you'll actually see that there are 6 verses that were loaded up. Because remember, I talked about before the fact that there will be custom verses if there are multiple effects for a given spell. Just like Magic Missile, these are all default to cast, so I will toggle these over into effect. Go ahead and put all of those over to effect. Now, if you're paying attention, you'll notice there's also this default column here. So in the case of a spell which has multiple verses associated with it, if you do not select anything as the default, what you'll find is when you go to cast that spell or apply that effect, it's going to prompt you on which one to use. Unfortunately, there is not a direct tie that this effect exactly works with this effect. All these so you have to know which effect you want to use when you get multiple effects. Let me show you what I mean. If we go ahead and we cast the atonement effect, it brings up a dialog box here that has us determine which of those effects we want to use. And since I know the atonement is the first one here on the list, I'll select the first item, and then that's the one that I'm going to use. But I couldn't specifically say, okay, whenever you cast the atonement effect, I want this verse to trigger. They kind of all show up at the same time. Now, the thing you can do with the multiple verses is maybe as a player, you might have multiple verses for the same spell, right, rather than multiple effects, and you want to mark one as a default to use most often, and then you can change it when you want to use a different verse later on. So if you've got multiple verses and one of them is marked as default, then when you apply any effect, the default verse or any damage or any heal, whatever the case may be, the one that is marked as default will be the only one that's shown, not one of the other options. So this is something you have to toggle on and off as a player, which you want to be your default one. Maybe you have one verse you say in the day and one verse you say at the night, something like that, and you have to toggle those back and forth. So now you'll see is if I toggle these effects and turn them on, we'll use Atonement. You'll see that it's going to apply the Bless one right here, but no matter which of these effects I use, it's going to use the same verse each time because I've marked that as my default verse. So that's just something to be aware of. If you don't like your default, take it back off again, and then next time you apply effect, you'll be prompted on which one of these you actually want to say. All right. We did talk a little bit about the edit section here, right? But in addition to the verses that are loaded up automatically, you have the ability to customize these. You can add them, remove them, delete them, just like any other objects within Fantasy Grounds. So let's say I never wanted to use this verse. I could open up the edit list and I could go ahead and remove some of these effects, right? Or I could just as easily add my own effect and put this in here. This is a custom rhyme, which I can't spell correctly because it's going to be just that kind of time that I'm having late at night today, and I can't type to save my life because it's after midnight. So let's just assume I know how to spell rhyme correctly because my brain is not working successfully, and I want to put this this custom verse in here. So just want to show you that you can add and remove these on your own. That also means if you have a spell which you did not load the verses in, and you just go straight into the edit option. Oh, look, I've got that one loaded up already. I was trying to find one I hadn't loaded up before. There we go, right? If you don't want to use the ones that come with the supplement, you can just come in and create your own custom verse. Man, I cannot type tonight to save my life. And put these in here and work directly within the spells themselves here. All right, so that's the basics of the supplement. Now I do want to show you one additional thing. Besides just being able to add custom verses like I just did, that's kind of on the fly. It happens with this character, and it will only be stored with this spell on this character sheet. But you do have the ability to take advantage of the extension such that you could have it apply to all instances of the spells no matter where they are. That's because of the way the extension works. What it's doing is it's matching any spell which has a story entry within the Verses Magicae story entries. So you can see here each one of these spells has its own individual story entry. At the very end, you'll see that there is an example under custom spells. You'll see two here because this is my version that I was using for testing earlier. So let me go ahead and get rid of those just so you're not confused. All right, so with the custom spells goes and tells you how you could create your own story entries so that they are automatically loaded up with the load default or when you add the power. It simply requires that you create a spell entry where the spell is in the story title and then the verse itself is within the chat frame which is loaded. So what you'll see here is that I've gone ahead and done two of these for our example for our demo here today. So in this case, Nanami, who's one of the characters in one of the campaigns that I play with, she's actually created her own custom spell called Nanami's Mischief, and it's kind of based off of an existing spell, but we've kind of tweaked and tuned the spell effects a little bit based on the childlike nature of the character. Things tend to involve sausages. So in this case, we've got 4 different spell effects, and what I've wanted to do here, I've broken these out into rather than having them as individual effects underneath this. Underneath the one spell, which I could have done, right? Like I had 4 different effect lines. But remember I was showing you before that when you cast the spell, you have to choose which of those effect lines you want to match up with the verses. In this particular case, what we've done is we've broken each of those effects out into their own lines so that we can go ahead and have them with their own individual effect lines. This allows us to tie individual verses to individual items. So when the spell effect for the number 3 incapacitated comes off, what I've done is I've created a spell entry that matches this. It's treating it like a spell, but it's really, we're going to use it for the spell effect. And I've gone ahead and named it. I've gone ahead and given it my custom rhyme there. And I've done the same thing here with the number 4 item, right? So you can see the name of the spell or the effect is here in the title, and then the verse that we're going to use is inside this window, right? So what that means is if we took our spells and we drag them, I don't have the spell loaded up here from the custom campaign because this is my demo, but if we dragged that over, it would get added automatically because it matches the name. In this case, we're going to do the manual load, but the same idea, right? If there wasn't a matching spell for it, loading up the default wouldn't do anything for us. But now if we go into the verses, we'll see that it has the verse that we have gone ahead and it's matched here from the story entry. Just like the other ones, right? We want this one to go off when the effect happens, even though you cast the spell. This is one of the things where it's a single cast, but multiple random effects. So in this case, the actual words will change based on the effect that we're going to do. So we'll change this to an effect cast, right? That way, what we could do is we could tie one verse to the actual casting of the spell, and then we could tie the effect verse to this one over here, so that we've got a custom verse, and she goes ahead and she wants to make this be difficult terrain. It's going to go ahead and give us our phrase about the sausages falling from the sky, or if they are incapacitated, it would go ahead. This one we forgot to make the change to the effect. Notice I clicked on, nothing happened. Notice that it fixed it immediately. Go to effect, click on our effect, and then the effect spell shows up, verse shows up. All right, I hope everybody enjoyed that preview tonight. Sorry for some of the rambling as I went through that. Like I said, it's a little late here tonight, and I was just trying to work through this without my customary script, kind of ad-libbed a little bit as I went. But I think that it proves that I probably need to have a more specialized script in the future, so I don't sound like I'm rambling to everybody. Bottom line is, this is a really unique product. It adds a lot of flavor to your campaigns and for your spellcasters. The fact that you can customize these verses that show up on a per character basis, on a per spell basis, I think that's really pretty exciting, and I think it's something that you'll want to pick up for your own campaigns. Thanks for your time, everybody. Good night.